no, he ain't squashing no beef, no beef. My dog got dumped in the middle of the road. We leaving this shit in the street. Got some shorties outside and they lurking for me.
And we're on. Happy Wednesday, episode 15, the AOS podcast. We are excited for this episode. I am Dave McGuire, 1/3, representing Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Figure I'd slide that in. You'll know why as the show gets going. But again, this is the AOS podcast, and we're excited to be here. As always, what we always say, follow us on Twitter, the AOS podcast, like our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube page, and if you're in the comments, drop a little hello, let us know how you're feeling, and like and share this show, because this is what we always say. It's Wednesday. This is free PD, and it's the realest ad movement. So as we always do, we're going to do check-in with the fellas, and we have three amazing guests that we'll introduce. So we'll start with the Real Men Teach shirt. Doc, there he is. What's up, brother? He's muted.
I mute myself
there
first.
You go.
Hey, we get so many guests on the show, we have to mute ourselves to make sure it flows. So we, just show we expanded. But hey, I'm doing good, man. I'm here representing Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, Dr. V. Smith out of Grandview, Missouri. Super excited about the show. We got some amazing guests, man. I'm ready to get it cracking. And shout out to the Real Men Teach. I finally got my shirt in, so I had to rep for them tonight.
Much love. West Coast Ball, what's up, man?
That's it. West Coast in the house. Good evening, everyone. Demetrius Ball here, the last third of the AOS podcast, but representing Omega Psi Phi, the greatest fraternity on earth. Sorry, fellas. So I'm excited to be here as well. We have a really good show planned, and I'm excited. Let's get it going.
We're going to jump right in. And so we're going to start with introduction. So I believe I have the first one, right? First introduction. So AOS podcast family, allow me to introduce to you Dr. Sean Williamson is currently the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Webster Grove School District in Webster Groves, Missouri. That's a show me state, right? Missouri is the show me state? Yeah, okay. Yep. So prior to assuming this inaugural position in October 2000, she was Associate Vice President of Student Life and Diversity and Chief Diversity Officer for Lindenwood University. She has nearly 25 years of experience in education and has presented at local, regional, and national conferences, as well as published research. She earned her doctorate degree from Rutgers University, an MBA from Lindenwood University, and an MS in Counseling and BA in Marketing from Shippensburg University. Did I get that right? Did I remember that?
That's
absolutely.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Williamson, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here. We're going to give you an opportunity, obviously, to expand on that bio, but we wanted to welcome you to the AOS podcast.
Thank you.
Doc, who we got next?
All right, so I have the pleasure of a groundbreaking moment for us here on the podcast in episode 15. He is our first member of Kappa Alpha Psi to be a part of this show. So we welcome today Mr. Cameron Poole, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. He serves as Director of Equity and Inclusion for the school district in Clayton. Prior to working in the school district in Clayton, he was assistant principal at Rockwood Summit High School. The bulk of his teaching experience was at Parkway Central High School, and he had a brief stint at Wright City High School and University City High School, teaching 912 social studies. Sports has been a big part of his life. He has been a coach in football, track and field, as well as basketball. Following his undergraduate work, he received a master's from teaching and education from Webster University, along with a 912 social studies certification. Adding to that, he has received a master's of education administration from Missouri Baptist, along with the 512 administrative certification, and he is currently working on his doctoral degree at Maryville University, where he is anticipated to graduate and become Dr. Poole this December. Welcome to the show, Mr. Poole.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, fellas. Glad to be here.
All right, I'm up next, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Ms. Ashlee Gutierrez to the AOS podcast family. Her pronouns are she and her. She has over a decade of experience in district, parochial, and charter schools. Currently, she serves as the equity coordinator for San Ramon Valley Unified School District. She is passionate about cultivating liberatory learning spaces for students and utilizing her EDD coursework in critical race theory and human rights education to guide her focus and strategy. When she's not hitting the books or writing a dissertation chapter, you can find her tending her urban garden, gaming on the Nintendo Switch, or creating interior design vision boards. Ashlee, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we will give each of you a few moments to kind of just jump in, expand upon your bio, talk about kind of some of the work that you're doing currently today, and then we'll jump into the topics after that. So we'll start with you, Dr. Williamson.
Thank you. Just to expand a little bit, so Webster Grove School District had created this position in October 2020, so I'm just pleased to be that inaugural candidate. And over the times of my expansion in higher education, I'm also still an adjunct professor at Lindenwood University in the School of Education. And last to add in there was my dissertation at Rutgers was on the role of integration, the role of academic integration and family on Black male STEM majors in higher education. So once again, I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, we appreciate that. Miss Ashlee, we'll have you go next. Mr. Poole, we're gonna let the ladies go first, so we'll catch you in a second.
All right. So I am also in an inaugural position for San Ramon Valley Unified. I do stand on the shoulders of many folks who came before me in TSA roles and held other equity-related roles throughout the district, but this is the first time there has been a full-time person at the district office really focused on this work. And my dissertation is going to be looking at liberatory leadership as a framework for school leaders, focusing on the three concepts of context, love, and risk.
And Mr. Poole?
Kind of like Dr. Williamson, my position in the school district of Clayton is new. So, I'm blazing a lot of trails in terms of, analyzing systems and trying to build systems and kind of, working within each realm to create equities and get rid of inequities that exist. One big focus for me is, creating and all students having a sense of belonging within a school. My dissertation has a focus on school culture and students having a stake of ownership, in their school and in their experience. And by creating that ownership and that cultural connection, students will feel at home and they'll be able to, really focus in because they feel that connection and they're in an environment that cultivates their talents and their gifts. So, we're just working to try to make the systems better, and continue to, build our students up so they have the confidence to do what they need to do in order to be successful.
Doc, can I hop in real quick? So I think it's amazing that the three of you are in brand new positions. Can you talk to us about why now? Why are so many districts going to some type of equity and inclusion specialist or role specifically within their districts?
I can jump into that. As you know, man, 2020 was a wake-up call, to a lot of experiences and, especially to, our Black and brown students, it's kind of a call that we've been, and they've been wanting to see get picked up for a long time. I guess it's a better late than never, type of approach to it. But, there seems to be a big sense of urgency in terms of, really trying to, identify and dismantle certain systems of inequities, that have persisted, for decades. So, I think it's a culmination of everything that has happened and, the push for urgency, in that direction. So, I think, one of the biggest things that I try to take pride in is trying to keep this thing going, and not letting this be something trendy. So trying to build something that's systemic and 10, 15, 20 years from now, systems that, we're the three of us are building right now, hopefully, are standing the test of time and starting to yield some results. So like I said, better late than never, but, let's get on the train and let's keep it going.
But I want to follow up to that. Maybe Dr. Williamson or Ashlee can speak to what Mr. Poole said. How do you make sure that the school districts don't get complacent? So once you guys do the great work that you're going to do, that they don't say, all right, now we're good, let me get back to things. How do you make sure that this job is not just a place filler, but something that should be a part of districts moving forward? And then those in the audience, if you work in a school district or lead in a school district or have your kids in the school district, jump in the comments and let us know, did your school district do the same thing and create these equity and diversity roles? So maybe ask Dr. Williamson, both of you, just talk about how do you make sure this remains moving forward?
Definitely. I think one of the biggest struggles that I've seen is we continue to talk about equity as this separate thing. Like there's a person who does equity work. And so my big focus is really showing people the onus of responsibility is theirs, regardless of where they are on the org chart, regardless of what they're responsible for in their job description, and thinking about the ways that we're embedding systems and structures and policies that are inherently setting us up for liberatory experiences for all of our students and all of our staff. And that's a real mindset shift for a lot of folks who are like, oh, we thought we were just going to bring in a person who's going to tackle that. And it's like, no, this is actually going to require some critical self-reflection of all of us. And it's a unified effort to really institutionalize what we're trying to do.
Exactly. And just to kind of carry on with Ashlee's thought is that there's so much work to be done, right? You know, yes, we're in districts who have created these new positions, and some have already had them few, but we're happy to be part of those who've taken the step in the right direction. But we're just on like the first peg of a long journey, right? You know, it's going to take a cultural shift, a transformation, money. You know, there's a lot that needs to be done. And so it's good and bad, meaning that reality is what it is, right? So as we're in our positions and we're showing at what the data says, we're showing all these places that we need to address, and we're showing that we can't accomplish all of those in our first year, right? And they all can't be our number one priority, which means we're going to have to make and create a strategic plan, outline short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals, and then what's going to happen. As we know in K through 12, it takes time to get policies passed, right? To change curriculum. So this is we're in it for the long haul. Hopefully, we can move this position up to like assistant superintendent position, have an actual department, as myself and Mr. Poole were just talking about. This is not a position for one, right? We should have staff, but that's going to be your next podcast. All right, I'll stop there.
So I guess I got a follow up to the follow up, and a shout out to my Auntie Toya and Auntie Renee in the building, 2/3 of the woke aunties. And I'm challenging my Auntie Toya with this question, and I asked this to Mr. Poole when we kind of talked this week about the show getting ready. Is do you feel? I mean, this is just my perception. I feel a lot of school districts are creating these, you know, directors of equity and inclusion as lip service, as a reactionary thing to what's going on in the world. Do you really think districts are really ready to put in the work that is going to change, that is going to take the change and move mindsets forward? Or is it kind of like, hey, this is to pacify you for now?
You know, I think a lot of that depends on, you know, who the person is that gets the job. You know, I feel like, you know, in terms of what are the expectations being set, you know, how much autonomy and how much voice is given to the person within the job, you know, what qualifications are they bringing in, you know, into the job. You know, it's interesting because all three of us, there's no set resume, you know, for this position. So all three of us kind of bring our own slant to the work. And, you know, how the work goes is based off of our experiences. So it's, you know, it's very interesting, you know, in terms of those conversations and what they look like and what moving the needle looks like. And like I said, time will tell. I think right now we got some good steam going, and, you know, my district seems very committed into the work and really building. You know, we're in the first year of a new 3-year strategic plan that has a heavy equity focus. And, you know, as we continue to get through each year of that strategic plan, we'll see how we continue to build. But kind of like Dr. Williamson said, you know, it's kind of the start of a marathon and getting people to understand. And as we uncover the data and how deep a lot of these inequities go, I mean, we're looking at things that haven't been looked at since Brown versus Board, you know, and trying to uncover that. So, you know, I think it's not microwave work, you know, B, a lot of people got to be self-reflective. And I think that's been the interesting part is that, you know, I feel like people look at inequities like it's a secret boogeyman pressing buttons. But it's interesting when you kind of get that data and you get those experience, like, boom, we just created a statistic with this situation. So it's everybody's feet being put to the fire and everybody responding in a way that's, you know, I got to get better. And we're all cogs in the system, you know, that's kind of created it. So I think as time progresses, we'll see, you know, and I think it'll be interesting to look back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now. What's changed in our districts? What stones have been unturned? If we're still in these positions, it'll be it'll tell a lot.
So I got another question. We've been talking a lot about equity. We've been using that kind of like the buzzword right now. So can you talk to our audience and kind of help them understand the difference between equity, equality, and inclusion? Like, what are those? How do those things differ? How are they the same? And how does that play out in the work that you do?
All right. Dr. Williamson, go.
Yeah, Dr. Williamson.
Thank you. So you're right. Those have been almost buzzwords, right? And so when we talk about equality, as we all know, it's about trying to give each person the same thing. We're way beyond that status, because every child needs something different. Every child has a different story to tell and a different experience. Some are free and reduced lunch. Some are first generation, right? Some are English is not their first language. Some have 2 mommies at home. Some are being raised by auntie and uncle. So all those children need something different. And even when we talk about staff members, we can't treat all our staff the same either. They all have different needs. And then you bring the equity piece, and that's when you start seeing, well, where are the gaps and what can we do to level that particular playing field? And then we need to move forward with that. That's still not sufficient, because we need to move forward where we don't have the gaps, we don't have the barriers, we don't have the walls, and we no longer need to fill those particular constraints that are in place. And inclusion is when you bring everyone to the table and they have a solid, equal voice, right? So it's not enough just to bring us to the table, like our positions. I'm always tell folks, who do you report to? If you're not reporting to the superintendent, then we need to talk about the value of your role in the district. Now, some districts are extremely large. I come from a small district. They might be reporting to someone else, but you can be at the table and still not have a voice, right? And so we need to look at, what does inclusion really mean, and how do we move forward to Ms. Ashlee's word of liberation? And that's our ultimate step.
Yeah, and when I think it's like that image you've maybe seen, there's the 3 students in the outfield, right? And there's been so many iterations of that image of just tearing the fence down ultimately. And I think, a lot of work that I've been reading recently is when we talk about who's at the table, who has agency at the table, who can create change at the table, then there's even this next level of like, is that the right table? Do all the people come together and build their own table? What is it that we're trying to accomplish together, and who gets to define what we're trying to accomplish together? So when I say liberatory, that's really what I'm thinking, and especially with students, right? What does it look like to have students at the forefront of driving our strategic plans, driving our strategic focus? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we work for them.
Mr. Poole, did you want to add to that or they kind of?
Yeah, man, everything that they said was gold. When I think of equity, and with any type of situation, I always ask, what's the student or what's the parent viewpoint? And if we can't answer that question, then we're not thinking equitable. So we can say, hey, this is inequitable, X, Y, and Z. I'm saying, well, what did the students and the parents say? And if we don't have that, I say, well, we're not acting equitably, so we can't take that next step until we know the answer to that question. It's letting the people who have suffered from inequities, push and push forward the narrative that they need in order to be successful. You know what I'm saying? If we're trying to, help someone's situation or create an equitable situation for someone, but we don't have their voice in any way at the table in order to make those decisions, then how do we know we're making those decisions in the best interest of them? One question that I talk about as we look at dismantling different areas of inequities, I always say, well, if we tear down the system, who's rebuilding? And how do we know the way in which we're rebuilding it is equitable? And we don't know that unless we know the voices and have the feelings of the people that we've been hurting, for the last decade. So in terms of equity, it's like, it's the student voice, it's the parent voice. Are those experiencing those said inequities? Do we know exactly what their experience is from their perspective? And if we don't, then we're not being equitable. So that's always my first question.
And I got a question to each of you, because you mentioned students and you mentioned parents. Why, when the conversation of equity comes up in school districts, why are school districts, it seemed, I'm going to say, why are many of them not open to hearing the voices of parents and of students? Why is there a fear? Is it they believe that they don't know what they're talking about? What do you think that is? What have you seen in your experience as you're diving into this work and you try to, engage with students and parents? What's been the reason why some don't do it?
I think you're asking folks to make a fundamental shift in their idea of what it means to lead, right? When we go through administrative training programs and these kind of formal institutions of schooling, we define the leader as the person who has an answer and who might elicit some feedback and, but they're going to come with an idea and folks are going to speak on that idea. And so the concept of going out into the community and saying, like, I'm coming agenda free, and I need you to tell me what your needs are and tell me how I can support you and partner with me in co-constructing that solution together. It's just an entirely different mindset and such a shift in how we approach leadership that it can be really difficult and really scary. And I think oftentimes folks don't realize that that would actually be incredibly valued in the community, but maybe they fear that that makes them look like they're not experts or they're not good at their job because it's not how we would traditionally define what a leader would do.
So within that, and you guys talked about your role specifically, but now, I want you guys to kind of go deep into your new roles and that you're taking on. So describe your role in the equity space. So if you're in your school district, in your school community, in your overall community, define for us or paint a picture for us what your work is like and what your role is in the equity space.
I piggyback just a little bit on that? When you're doing that, can you talk about the challenges you face? Because this is a new role and you're defining. What are the challenges that you've run into as you try to come into this role and create this role? We can start with, go ahead, Ms. Dr.
Okay, I'll jump in first. So for me, I directly report to the superintendent. I'm a Webster Grove School District. I'm located in central office. And my role is dealing with professional learning and training sessions, policy development. If there's an issue that's related to bias in any form or fashion, I serve as that point person. If it's doing mediation between staff and staff, intervening with, students and parents, just kind of being that key point person for all issues related to DEI work. Challenges that I have faced thus far is, while we've been very progressive as a school district for like the past several years, like we had an equity resolution back in 2017 and been making a lot of progress, and our community is fairly affluent, the same as Mr. Poole's, but we still have some of those parents and community members who don't support our work, right? And they don't support our equity efforts, and they will not vocalize it like on social media, but they're the ones who send the emails or make the phone calls, right? So they'll do it behind closed doors of their views opposing the work that we are trying to complete and do. And so those have been some challenges as far as listening to those voices, because we have to value diversity of thought, and hearing what they have to say, and then empowering our teachers and administrators to stand strong. So, hey, if you're getting a lot of this pushback, just send them to me, right? This is my role. I'm happy to intervene and communicate with those individuals about why we're doing what we're doing.
We'll jump over to you, Mr. Poole.
Yeah, so, there's so many levels. I look at the role similar to like your chief technology officer in your district, in terms of, kind of not necessarily isolating, but everyone's not really, there to do specifically the work that you do. Where a teacher, it's their role to run the technology in their classroom and make sure kids have what they need in order to, engage in lessons. If something goes wrong, the only person who knows, the thought process is the only person who knows how to fix it is the technology person. So it's almost as if, in trying to build capacities, whether it's curriculum, student experience, behavior, parent connection, community involvement, it's only one tech dude. So he's gotta do all the work, or she's gotta do all the work. And that's kind of the feeling with it that makes it somewhat difficult, is that, you know, you're asked to be, kind of an expert on curriculum. You're asked to look at student experience, all of these things. And you feel yourself doing good work, and it's very rewarding. But I think the ultimate thing is, building that capacity. Almost, you want to get yourself to a point to where you perform yourself out of a job. And we're kind of in that beginning stages with the work and kind of the lens in terms of how we're viewing education and student experience and things, as to how do we build that and how do we get to that point. So, it's, like I said, being in curriculum committees, it's analyzing discipline data. It's looking at our placement, whether it be for gifted or honors classes, or even our placement as kids go into remedial courses like reading and math. Again, it's looking at the overall student experience, looking at the experience of our minority teachers in the district and what exactly is their experience and how do we retain that. So we're in human resources, we're in curriculum, we're in teaching and learning, we're in professional development and building that framework. So what does learning look like for every teacher that comes into the district? One thing that I'm tasked with is building that framework. So year one, when a teacher comes into the district, this is their equity education. Year 2, year 3, year 4, how do we build goals on that as they get on the tenure track, and so on. So there's so many, every avenue, we're playing a party. Like I say, I even mentioned technology. So equity questions come up, especially, with the pandemic. Who has a hotspot? Who has access to a Chromebook? What's the internet connection like at that home? What can we do from a student services standpoint, a technology standpoint? So again, it's like you're the point person for all things DEI. And the interesting thing is DEI like bleeds into every space. So it's prioritizing and figuring out exactly where you need to, what areas you need to tackle the most. And that changes daily.
So with that, and we talked about this before, me and you talked about how it bleeds into every space. So you're in HR, you're in curriculum and instruction, you're in finance, you're in all those other places. But is it almost to the point where like you're in so many different places, you can't be effective because you're spread so thin? So how do you combat that to ensure that, where's the most need at this moment? Like, and at the end of the day, for me, is how is this work that you're doing affecting student achievement at the end of the day? How is that helping kids read? How is that helping kids understand math? Like, how does that work play into that of what we're doing?
Yeah, that's almost the way that positions like this are designed, right? So we're intentionally placed as sort of the jack of all trades who's supposed to have a hand in all of these things and then render ourselves ineffective because we can't do it all. So when I'm thinking about the work that I prioritize, I really do ask that question of what has the most impact for a student in their classroom tomorrow, and what can I do that would reach students? And I think that one other way, I echo what my colleagues have said around what they're responsible for and what that all looks like. I think one strategy that I've been trying recently is to support the critical self-reflection of my colleagues and sort of pointing out moments where there might be gaps in our thinking around an issue, or we could be applying an equity lens where maybe we're not, and just trying to build that skill set up in others so that it's not me who's responsible for pushing all of these initiatives, but that every person from their specific lane can be driving this work forward.
Yeah, those are great points. I'm gonna hop in here. One of the things that I've been thinking about is leadership, and Auntie Toya in the comments talked about, the board level and those types of things. I think it's really important for us as school leaders, the three of us, we want to lead when it comes to equity work. We want to be doing the right things and having that impact on our staff and on our students and their day-to-day work. So I think it's really important for our board level and our superintendent level to be modeling those types of expectations. Are those things that you're seeing? Because I know from a school site perspective, like that's something that's needed. It just makes things so much easier when you want to begin a discussion around Black History Month, and your superintendent or the board, they don't just put something out there and they're leading the way. Are you seeing that as an effective way of leading this equity work?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it. It starts from the top. I can luckily say, my superintendent, is just an entrenched in the work, as we all are. He's actually leading some equity development with other superintendents around the area, some book studies and some self-reflection. I've met with my board of education in small groups in terms of talking about equity, what equity means to them, what's their journey, on this equity, on the equity path, and continuing to have those conversations, tons of time, to reflect and talk about what we're seeing at the K through 12 level at board meetings. Last week, I just gave a quarterly equity update to where, gave a report on all things that we're doing. It led to a lot of great conversation, dialogue, and questions on what we can do to continue to move things forward. So, I can say that, that support from the top, from the top down is definitely trickling in. And, like I said, our strategic plan that we just developed, is totally totally devoted to equity, and social emotional health and learning. So, it's something that, we're really putting, kind of putting the pedal to the metal with, and it's definitely a big focus. So that's super important. If that wasn't there, again, I don't know, where that direction or where that, will to keep going would come from. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be talked about at every board, within every district, with every superintendent.
Yeah, we have a great board, even starting back with my position. So my position was created after the budget was set. And you all know in the K through 12 world, once that budget is set for the fiscal year, typically is not altered. So that was a huge sign. Recently, I completed a 2-hour training on anti-bias, anti-racism work that I conducted for our entire Board of Education on a Saturday morning. And they asked for more. They said that they really enjoyed it. And then lastly, last Thursday, our board approved our anti-bias, anti-racism policy. And so we're super excited about that. And as we know, you have board support, but then once it's written into policy, that's where you really see the value and the key direction. And our superintendent clearly is on board with supporting all these efforts.
So I want to kind of ask a question, because when you talk about, like I said, we keep saying this diversity and equity and things like that. So one of the definitions of equity is, a fair and impartial sharing of information and things like that. So a lot of times we talk about equity, we're only talking about it from the standpoint of having race, how we bring in minorities, people of color into the conversation, things like that. I want to put it from a different standpoint, because I feel like as educators, we have locked out parents' voice in this process. So how is your work in equity bringing parent voice back into the conversation?
Well, that's kind of where I started with it. Talking to the parents, and, especially with there being a huge focus on racial equity, especially with disparities for Black students. I called parents and I asked 2 fundamental questions, and, it turned into gave me the best data, I could ever had. I asked, what's it like being a Black parent in the school district of Clayton? And knowing what you know now, if you were doing it all over again, would you send your kid back into our district? And I think those are 2 hard questions, that you really have to ask and kind of get the answer to, because, asking their experience broke everything down. And you can tell they could start from kindergarten and work on up to, senior year in high school. So the bulk of my data and the bulk of, when I got into the job, the first thing I did is an equity audit of the district. A big bulk of that was hearing those parents' voice, because kind of like I said, first step of equity, what do the students say? What do the parents say? So that needs to be kind of that focal point of where we're at. And again, like, their voice is front and center, in terms of mobilizing our parents as a collective to use each other as a resource and, create a strategy to better navigate the system. That's at the foundation as well, in order to, not only empower, and give voices, to those who haven't had it, but at the same time, dismantle those systems in the process. So it kind of being like a twofold path. So gotta embrace them, and that was one of the first things that I did.
So I want to ask a question that's going to hopefully get a good conversation started. So each of you, I believe as you speak, you're in districts. And so I'm a principal of a charter school. So I want to ask this question. If my school district doesn't have the funds to create a position like this, or there's so many other things that's happening in our district that are our network or whatever in our schools that we cannot, hire one person for this. What advice do you have for those school leaders or smaller single site charters or smaller schools that don't have the, how can we get some of this information? Because we're dealing with those same problems. We just don't have the luxury to hire someone, like you in those roles to support our district. So where should we go? Because what I've seen is we're getting a hodgepodge. One year we got this person presenting on this, and then we bring this person in, I'm gonna bring this person in. Or in the same year, I do 3 sections of diversity, equity, inclusion training, and I got 3 different presenters, which also comes with 3 different mindsets and people with their own agenda. So speak to those like me and other leaders who don't have someone in that role. Where should we go and how should we seek to get support to make sure we're doing right when it comes to equity and inclusion?
I can speak to that, having just come from a charter school that was a lean, small charter network of 2. And I think that speaking to your point around the inconsistency of development opportunities and the kind of one-off, I think the first place to start is really thinking about what your strategic priorities look like and what would it look like to walk folks along this development path over time, so that when you're making decisions about the organizations you're reaching out to or the grants that you're applying for, that you really have a clear understanding of the why and how this connects back to what your priorities are, which ultimately would be driven by your community. So I think access to the trainings and the resources and all of that, like we can do that, right? We can do grants, we can find the philanthropic organizations that are going to support the work, but it's about kind of weeding through everything that's out there to find the right stuff at the right time for the right groups of people in your community. And so that's got to start with a look inward first, and then you can kind of source out after that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to just go keep going because this is a serious thing because we know that this is important. So then we talked about if we're a small school. What about the school that they need to increase student achievement? How can you speak to the charter leader, whether the principal or the CEO of the charter network, and say, by doing this work effectively, you can drive student achievement? Because in my mind as a principal, if I'm trying to turn around a school, I'm looking for resources that's going to help kids be able to read, write, and compute math, right? How do we speak to them from an equity standpoint on why it's important that you got to make sure that this leg of your school is also operating right, because it's also going to drive student achievement? So how do you tie it into student achievement for those schools that's their number one priority?
Can I frame that question a little bit different, Dave? Because I think you're speaking from a charter standpoint, but I want to speak from a district standpoint who don't have these people in position. When we know as school leaders, we need this work to be done. How do we coach up to the people above us to make sure they understand the need and desire at the building level for this work to be done and to allocate funds or whatever? So what advice would you give us to coach up to, like, how will we make this work if you don't have the budget in a charter school or in a district school?
Good point.
Were you about to speak, Cameron? Oh, okay. For me personally, when I was in higher education, well, it's not K through 12, it was the same situation. We had a gap between Black students and white students graduating. It was a 26% gap, right? And so something that I did was I pulled the data, and I pulled all the data to show. I ran a survey, a qualitative survey, as well as quantitative survey, getting feedback from our students. I looked at nationally normed surveys that were completed, and I put all that together and worked with our institutional research office and really just put a presentation together to the president, and just talking about, we hate to use the term reorganization, but money has to come from somewhere because what we're doing is not working. And one way to address these particular issues is to create, in my experience, it was a diversity and inclusion center that is staffed to come in and help support me as chief diversity officer at the time to address these needs, right? And so I would transition that to that K through 12 world. We all know that data speaks. CEOs, principals, superintendent, they want data-driven decisions. So if you're able to connect and clearly display we have this situation because of X. And if we feel X with this person or this position, this will help us close this particular achievement gap or address this particular issue. So those would be my recommendations.
How I would add on to that, I think, one of the big things is, making the inequities as real as possible, to the necessary stakeholders. And, one thing that I really look at is what's the story behind, the inequitable number or the disproportionate number. And it could be a simple fix. It could be a fix that, is staring you right in the face. So I always, again, I like, creating segments to where you're having individual conversations, giving students and parents voice for them to say, hey, your kid or our kids, are behind in math or behind in reading. What are we doing, within our processes, within what we do on a daily basis, within our school, within our district, within our system? What are we doing to where you all and our students aren't succeeding at the level we need them to succeed? And kind of really tabulating that qualitative data to say, based off of these numbers, these kids are saying, they're not motivated to read the types of books that they have. So maybe we need a more culturally inclusive curriculum. They don't like the way the teachers talk to them, and there's a lack of respect. So maybe our teachers need culturally responsive training. It's like, we have our data points, which, across the board as a nation, are pretty similar as you compare, regardless of where you are. But we got to make those stories real, and we really got to get power to that voice. And when you're talking to that parent or that student, and they're telling you, man, they don't care about me learning, so it's not even a priority, or I'm not getting the attention that I need. Like, it's hard to deny that. So I try to say, put the story behind the data, and we have to supplement our data, with those stories, give parents voice, give student voices. And even at that point, one thing that I've found out, especially in the short time we've been in the work, is that oftentimes our inequities that we create into these huge monsters is simple, to where all we had to do was pick up the phone and ask, hey, mom, is everything okay? And she tells us, and we know exactly how to plan that. So it's establishing that communication and that trust, which, to be honest, with Black parents in our school system is hurting right now. And we got to work to build that trust, get the story behind that data, because it could be something as simple as, my parents lost their job. I'm having a hard time. I fell behind in a semester, and now that put me on a trajectory where I'm 2 grade levels behind. When we would acknowledge a problem at the beginning, we're able to, to prevent that. So really working to get them stories, is what I would say, and those stories that really tell us, man, we have talented people in the field, can tell us what exactly we need to do in order to put the right fixes in.
So we're running up against time. We got a jam-packed shows tonight. So I'm gonna ask if my fellow co-hosts, if we just yield our time on closing thoughts tonight and let our guests have the wrap up for us. So Ms. Dr. Williamson, we'll go with you first for final thoughts. Anything that you want to leave the people with. Ms. Ashlee, we'll go with you next, and then we'll finish with you, Mr. Poole.
Thank you. So first, I just want to say thank you to the organizers, because events like this are empowering, right? Because as a Black person, myself, and all of us on this podcast, we need each other. And the work is not easy by any means necessary. And so being able to have a support system, whether it's personally or professionally, to continue to combat the issues that we face is key in our journey and transformation. And the advice that I would continue to give is, again, we all need allies. We can't open doors on our own. So being able to open a door for someone else and provide support, and being able to speak up and not just settle for the status quo is how we're going to continue to keep moving forward.
Thank you. I would add that in education, there is no shortage of push for a specific initiative or idea or product that is going to be the magic solution. And as my colleagues have mentioned, relationship is really the single most important thing we can be investing in. So I am a big believer in strategically deprioritizing a lot of stuff that people tell us is important to kind of get back to the basics. So leading with relationship, building trust with our communities, starting there, and then that will help us figure out the path forward.
And again, man, appreciate you all putting this together and having us on. Kind of like Dr. Williamson said, man, the work is taxing, and it's a lot. And this level of, camaraderie that just nationwide, it seems, that's being built with Black educators and really sticking together is becoming powerful. I mean, even Dr. Williamson has kind of created a network with all of the equity directors within the St. Louis area for us to connect, and have a safe space, man. So this is therapeutic for me. Man, just to close it out, again, the more and more I get into the work, man, it goes down to, again, you got to go to the source to understand why inequities exist, and if we aren't engaging our students, if we aren't engaging our parents, we're throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping that we're making the right decisions. And tearing down systems or tweaking systems, we have to have the voices of those experiencing those inequities, at the forefront and at the center of that. And if their voices aren't there, and especially in districts like, especially like me and Dr. Williamson are in, it's not a lot of us. So it's very important to engage those parents. It's important to engage those stakeholders within the district, that have experienced those inequities, and important to engage those students. So engage, build relationships, humanize experiences.
I will say this on behalf of the AOS team. We appreciate each of you for coming on. Like I love shows like this where I can kind of sit back and learn, especially being, again, in a charter school where, I mean, DEI, we just created a diversity statement 2 years ago, right? So we are well behind where we need to be. So it's good to hear from you all. While we can't, hire someone in your role, I now have a better idea of what we need to seek out that type of support. And so we appreciate that. These Wednesdays, it's free PD. It's the realest ad movement. So we thank each of you for coming on. You always have a platform here. Thank you for everybody that's been rocking with us. And like I said in the beginning, follow us on Twitter, the AOS Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Like us on Facebook. We'll see you guys next Wednesday. But until then, stay tuned in to the A Black Hand Podcast Network, because coming up, super producer Unc Ray got an emergency show, The Rochester Files, a panel discussion on policing Black and brown bodies. I don't know if you guys seen that video of that 9-year-old girl that got pepper spray. He's gonna have some parents and some folks on talking about that. So make sure you tune into that, streaming live here next on the AOS or the A Black Hands Podcast Network. This has been the AOS Podcast. As always, it's the realest ad movement. A5 is in the building. As always, see y'all February 17th. Have a good one, folks.
Peace.